A to Z Futurism, Bios. Introduction. Bios as a term in post-human literature is interpreted as requisite to the study of the futures. This video is related to the term bios through the perspectives of post-human studies and philosophical approaches to how we define life in the past, present and futures. Life is a process of being, the acceleration towards action and reaction through causes and effects. In numerous definitions, life is related to ontology in philosophical approaches. Specifically, ontology is a branch of metaphysics dealing with the nature of being. These ontological approaches of knowing, perceiving and interpreting the world are generally placed into four distinct categories: realism, empiricism, positivism and postmodernism. The extinct species in Earth's geological records reminds of the process of choice, chance and change, the three C's often attributed to the fundamental nature of evolution in deep cosmic pasts. The ontological matrix of the futures is previously described in my introduction to transhumanism and posthumanism. In this video, the description of life is contrasted to necropolitics of being. The contrast is fully explored as conceptualized paradoxical outcome where the extant Homo sapiens end leads to post-ontologies. Transhumans critique the chance variable in evolution, wherein the postmodern technologies are leading to theoretical new forms of life, i.e. artificial, or a fusion of biological and technological. Bios is a broad topic of posthumanism where the epistemological approaches interprets these new forms of life as not an extension of humanism, but end of the anthropos. This video is to explore playfully the various future taxonomic nomenclature of post-ontologies similar to biological phylogenetic trees to reveal the uncertainty of the naming the so-called human 2.0 or Homo Deus. Etymology of bios. Bios are in Greek. The bios is intricately linked to the zoe, and it is a foundational property of the anthropos, the site that both binds and delimits the anthropos to and from the rest of the animals. Both the term bios and zoe are very similar in content and context. It appears that zoe references the biological aspect of life, the state of living, while bios can be thought of as referring to the length of the experience of living. Bios and zoe are two distinct etymological terms, although a third etymological term psyche is appropriate to depict the term life is interconnected to mind, body, and spirit. The Greeks had no single term to express what we mean by the word life. They used the two terms that, although traceable to a common etymological root, are semantically and morphologically distinct. Zoe is life, but more specifically it is expressed as the life common to all living beings, animals, men, or gods. Bios indicates the form or way of living proper to an individual or a group. The two forms of the word are not tautological, but there is also no question about the fact that when Aristotle talks about the act of living well, he uses the form zen as in eu zen rather than eu vianai, which would equally be available to him. The concept of zoe ionios translated as eternal life is said to be found in Christ according to Christians. Philosophers argue that the examined life of Plato and Aristotle, bios theoretikos, the self-reflexive control over life, in Christianity has come to be colonized by male, white, heterosexual, Christian, property-owning, standard language-speaking citizens. This ownership of life extends into other cultures and religions, whereby this control over life is pursued by male, property-owning and intellectual upper class. Thus religiosity in its zeal and fundamentalism is questionable in the post-human world. There is an option to completely deny cultural, religious, social and political anthropisms in a moderate pacifist non-misanthropic post-human specific way. This is typically seen through the lenses of cyborgization of the human condition if the technology becomes available. But this raises questions of whether multinational corporations have ownership of cyborgs or sentient beings with awareness and conscious experiences. Ownership of life. Bios is based on centralized sources of power. Decentralized systems shares its resources with all the collective groups, even those who are individualized, therefore creating an egalitarian system and same rights in ownership of property, digital assets, physical objects, etc. Most of the contemporary media and actual post-human femininity is based focal points of property ownerships or the lack of it, increasingly heading towards social disruptions as the cyborg posthumans come into the world of politics, laws, and rights. One may argue that self-ownership, cyborg Bill of Rights, and the topic of posthuman bodies politics inevitably leads to cyborgs voicing their rights to self-ownership within the specificity of their internal organs, algorithms, programming, technological implants and external specific assets such as vehicles, apartments, tools, etc. Others from corporations may argue, the programming, the technological implants or anything related to metal is in its totality, owned by the makers or the corporations. Essentially we are perplexed and questioned as to what can cyborgs own if provided with a so-called cyborg Bill of Rights in the future. Posthuman literature. Giorgio Agamben, born the 22nd of April 1942, is an Italian philosopher with great works spanning political theory, ontology, aesthetics, and literature. He developed the concepts of the state of exception and homo sacer, which explore the relationship between sovereignty, legal authority, and what he calls bare life. Curiously, his writings draw on sources including Aristotle, Roman law, Christian theology, Martin Heidegger, Walter Benjamin, Ludwig Wittgenstein, St. Augustine and Carl Schmitt among others. Giorgio Agamben's writings interconnect critically with Michel Foucault's account of biopolitics and biopower. Agamben's multi-volume Homo Sacer project has been widely interpreted within political philosophy, jurisprudence, anthropology, and the humanities, and he is said to be one of the most influential writers in contemporary continental philosophy. Thus the post-human definitions of bios is of great importance, and Giorgio Agamben provides it succinctly, as do contemporary thinkers in our time. Bios and Zoe, Biopolitics. In the final volume of a series of literary works, Agamben intends to address the concepts of forms of life and lifestyles. What I call a form of life, he explains, is a life which can never be separated from its form, a life in which it is never possible to separate something like bare life. Here too the concept of privacy comes into play. If human beings were or had to be this or that substance, this or that destiny, no ethical experience would be possible. Furthermore, he explains this does not mean, however, that humans are not, and do not have to be, something, that they are simply consigned to nothingness and therefore can freely decide whether to be or not to be, to adopt or not to adopt this or that destiny. Thus nihilism and decisionism coincide at this point. There is in effect something that humans are and have to be, but this is not an essence nor properly a thing, it is the simple fact of one's own existence as possibility or potentiality. Quoted by Giorgio Agamben, The Coming Community, 1993, Section 11. The reduction of life to biopolitics is one of the main threads in Agamben's work, in his critical conception of a Homo Sacer, reduced to bare life, and thus deprived of any rights. Agamben's concept of the Homo Sacer rests on a crucial distinction in Greek between bare life, la vita nuda zoe, and a particular mode of life, or qualified life, bios. In Part 3, Section 7 of Homo Sacer, the camp is the nomos of the modern, he evokes the concentration camps of World War II. In the process of creating a state of exception, effects can compound. In a realized state of exception, one who has been accused of committing a crime, within the legal system, loses the ability to use their voice and represent themselves. The individual is deprived of their citizenship, but also of any form of agency over their own life. Agamben identifies the state of exception with the power of decision over life. The conclusion in its totality of the literature under Agamben suggests within the state of exception, the distinction between bios, the life of the citizen, and zoe, the life of Homo Sacer, is made by those with judicial power. Zoe is etymologically Greek and is a female first name of Greek origin, meaning life. In mythology, the Greek goddess Zoe is the goddess of life. The difference between psyche and Zoe is that the phenomenon of life will be addressed on its three essential planes: bios, life in its core manifestations; psyche, intelligent and conscious life; Zoe, life that transcends itself. Zoe is different from bios, and the latter represents the political, intelligent and discursive side of life, while the former stands for the mindless vitality of life carrying on independently and regardless of rational control. This concept of Zoe is at the core of the post-anthropocentric feminist turn. It is a materialist, secular, grounded and unsentimental response to the opportunistic trans-species commodification of life that is the logic of advanced capitalism. From this theoretical foundation, philosophers and post-human thinkers discuss the book, The Post-Human, written by Rossi Braidotti, and subsequent voluminous works such as Post-Human Glossaries and the place of the humanities in the contemporary university. As defined in the video in this playlist titled Introduction to Transhumanism and Posthumanism, the post-human imaginaries involve fusions of between human and machine, such as cyber enhancement. The crucial blurring is not that between human and non-human, nature and culture, but between humanity 1.0 and 2.0. The post-human is a variant from the human state for various reasons, and thus recenters the human at its core, as that which post-human goes beyond and improves upon. The quality of humanness is already evident in our culture or those seeking to become more than human, thus some suggest we are already post-humans. The decentering of the human at its core results in questions of what is it to be human, what is our purpose as a collective, and bioethical considerations in relation to cyber and genetic enhancement. Posthumanism, literally meaning after humanism, or beyond humanism, is a term with at least 7 definitions according to philosopher Francesca Ferrando. 1. Antihumanism. 2. Cultural posthumanism. 3. Philosophical posthumanism. 4. Posthuman condition. 5. Posthuman transhumanism. 6. AI takeover. 7. Voluntary human extinction. The term bios in post-human studies relates to becoming an animal in a non-anthropocentric view where outcomes are usually considered in 2 categories, the human and non-human. Thus there are types of posthumanism including reactive, analytical and critical. The analytical post-human philosophy proposes the question of becoming Earth in a geocentered interconnected way. This model of geocentering holds the past as organic life and the future as inorganic life. Though artificial life may be able to replicate the processes of life, it may lose the essence of humans, or the Zoe. The main reason most perspectives see the inevitability of inorganic futures is primarily based on futuristic philosophical approaches of how humans have devastated the ecology. Thus Felix Guattari's three apologies, the psyche, environment, social relations, echoes and resonates poignantly as we envision inorganic futures. Examples of artificial intelligence reaching general intelligence and even the technological singularity to superintelligence remind us of the fragility of organic life as we know it. The transversal connections and multiplicity of perspectives between life bios and necros, i.e. death, is clearly depicted and highlights how the three types of post-humanism result in a spectrum of viewpoints intellectually and honestly to consider. Humanism, inhumans, non-humans, anti-humanism, critical posthumanism and misanthropic necropolitics are some examples. Eco-critical perspectives envisions human inequality as ecocide and theoriocide, essentially matter-realist viewpoints. Posthuman considers life through dynamic systemic perspectives, and their toolkit is in what they call cartographic accuracy as follows. 1. Position. 2. Bias. 3. Location. 4. Politically self-aware. Thus life temporally is memory and memory is imaginations in a matter-realist viewpoint. The future is vocalized and defamiliarized humanity envisioned as a non-linearity rhizomatic network based on the ontology of becoming. Most transhuman thinkers are still not aware of how this ontology will occur. One curious futuristic description of beings is a synthetic mycelium-based networked rhizomatic ontology. Thus we enter the realm of organoid intelligence and biocomputers from fungi, mushrooms, that may dehumanize us. The schism or conflict is between mutant values of old, i.e. natural selection, versus futurist extropian directed evolution. Simply put, we have a choice to become more or stay human by simply resisting organoid intelligence as it emerges decades later. Biocomputers are useful in reinventing ourselves to become post-humans, but there are other paths as described in various videos in this playlist. As a minority reinvent themselves through biotechnology, the elasticity of intellectual motions comes into the forefront, questioning themes which are usually related to cultural elasticity, cultural hegemony, one's technicity and feminicity. The intellectual motion is an essential framework to consider in post-human studies. Life is given a choice of upgrades, the bios can change, but one must ask the most enduring question: what happens to Zoe, the essence of life, life that transcends itself? We must think in multiplicity and a sympoetic way, which psyche, bios and Zoe act in unison. Posthuman rejects anthropisms, but posthuman theories have no reliable answer to consciousness or souls, which are distinct but they may form a putative unseen bioenergetic field in animals, especially humans. This New Age spiritualist concept is further explored in my upcoming video, Bioenergetic Field Science. In summary, the post-human cyborg is temporally life or bios, therefore he or she should be treated as a disconnected individual outside of a rhizomatic technoculture. Most people favor the logical direction of posthumans, and this is outer space. Posthumans and AI will have a far more presence in outer space than Earth if progress in technology proceeds exponentially. Thus the concepts of bios, Zoe are also somewhat exopolitic, or cosmocentric in deeper timescales of the future. The vast timescales in cosmic scales makes us wonder about the intricacies of the taxonomy of posthumans and beyond. The true extent of which life stays organic theoretically is somewhat unknown, but estimates of rate of acceleration towards computronium, a substrate that remakes organic matter in ontologies, hints to a profound prediction: the universe wakes up and is filled with inorganic technocultures in deep cosmic futures. As a playful scenario in a thought process, if we envision the futures, typically we see the taxonomy of futures and biological nomenclature expressed in only hypothetical scenarios in our time. An example is listed above: Life, Mars, Orion, Alpha Centauri, Pleiades, Arcturus, and others. Domain: Digital Silicon Mycelium. Kingdom: Cybermalia. Phylum: Digitaris Cyberchordata. Class: Cybermammalia. Order: Cybernates. Family: Cybernidae. Genus: Cyber. Species: Cybersapiens. Subspecies: Homo digitaris sapiens, emulated sapiens ems, Homo deus, Homo digitaris. There are other names for posthumans based on the isms or ideologies of future beings that we have yet to create, but it is only speculation and beyond the scope of this video. Thanks for watching. Drop a like, share and subscribe.